A former president of the United States was criminally investigated by his own government. That fact is uncontested. It arises from formal processes, sworn testimony, and judicial oversight. It reflects a collision between executive power and legal accountability. The Constitution assumes good faith. The system relies on norms. When those norms are stressed, institutions respond through law, not rhetoric. Prosecutorial authority activates only after thresholds are crossed. Evidence determines direction. Process constrains discretion. What follows is not about politics. It is about how power behaves when challenged by rules. At issue is whether constitutional mechanisms were deliberately manipulated to alter outcomes, electoral certification, custody of classified material, compliance with lawful orders. These are structural functions. When disrupted, the threat is systemic, not symbolic. The legal system addresses such threats through documentation, testimony, and attribution of responsibility. Intent matters, control matters, proximity matters. Investigations advance when internal clarity replaces external speculation. The pivotal development is not public criticism or partisan dispute. It is the movement of information from inside closed circles to state authority. That shift transforms risk. It redefines exposure. It alters the balance between power and law. When those closest begin to speak, the system moves forward. Witness cooperation from within the subject's own organization alters the evidentiary balance. It converts allegations into internal verification. Prosecutors gain access to first-hand knowledge. Decisions, instructions, timing, and intent become traceable. Informal conversations become admissible narratives. Hierarchies become visible. Authority is mapped through testimony. Responsibility concentrates upward. Defense strategies narrow. Claims of misunderstanding weaken. Claims of distance collapse. The state no longer relies on inference alone. It relies on proximity. Loyalty structures dissolve under subpoena power. Individual exposure replaces collective silence. Cooperation becomes a rational legal response. The investigation shifts from external conduct to internal process. Power is reconstructed as evidence. Control becomes liability. Silence becomes risk. The case architecture stabilizes. The evidentiary record changes further when cooperation originates from political allies. Partisan counterarguments lose effectiveness. Bias claims lose traction. Credibility assessments shift. Jurors evaluate testimony against prior allegiance. Statements against interest carry legal weight. Cooperation signals perceived risk. It indicates exposure within the cooperating group. It suggests corroboration already exists. Prosecutors gain leverage across actors. Fragmentation replaces unity. Institutional defenses weaken. Oversight narratives harden. Political insulation fails under cross-examination. The record becomes structurally bipartisan. The investigation acquires institutional legitimacy. The state's case relies less on adversaries. It relies on internal confirmation. Authority fractures under legal pressure. Intent becomes provable when internal witnesses describe decision-making. Knowledge replaces assumption. Warnings, advice, and refusals are documented. Repetition establishes awareness. Persistence establishes purpose. Prosecutors trace mental state through testimony. Statements show rejection of lawful outcomes. Actions follow expressed objectives. Legal thresholds are met through accumulation. Reasonable doubt narrows. Innocent explanation weakens. The narrative shifts from error to choice. Conduct aligns with foreknowledge. Authority is exercised despite contrary facts. The evidentiary burden moves from circumstantial to direct. The state demonstrates willfulness. Responsibility becomes individualized. Intent is no longer inferred. It is articulated. The record reflects conscious direction. Legal exposure expands accordingly. The structure of the false elector operation clarifies liability. The process was not spontaneous. It followed coordination. Documents were drafted, meetings were organized, participants were instructed, certificates were signed, state procedures were mimicked, legitimacy was simulated. The objective was procedural disruption. Congressional certification was targeted. Competing slates were positioned for use. The scheme relied on ambiguity. It sought institutional confusion. Execution required legal knowledge. Direction came from campaign authority. The operation crossed from advocacy into interference. Criminal statutes attach to falsification. Conspiracy becomes demonstrable. Responsibility consolidates through planning. The record reflects design, not chaos. Coordination across multiple jurisdictions establishes scale and intent. Actions repeat with consistency. Methods mirror each other. Timelines align. The same documents appear in different states. The same legal theories circulate. Organizers communicate across state lines. Local actors follow central guidance. This defeats claims of isolated conduct. It shows planning depth. It shows operational control. A pattern emerges. Uniform execution implies oversight. Decentralization becomes improbable. Authority is inferred from repetition. The scope elevates exposure. Federal implications strengthen. The conduct shifts from local anomaly to national strategy. Prosecutors map networks. Connections replace coincidence. The scheme reflects deliberate replication. Responsibility concentrates when command structures are demonstrated. Orders are traced upward. Intermediaries relay instructions. Decisions originate centrally. Participants act within defined roles. Autonomy is limited. Direction is explicit or implied. Knowledge flows vertically. Control mechanisms appear. The principle is no longer abstract. Attribution becomes precise. Legal doctrines attach liability to leadership. Distance defenses erode. Delegation fails as insulation. The record links action to authority. The chain of command clarifies culpability. Power becomes evidentiary. Governance decisions convert into legal risk. Movement of materials after official requests triggers obstruction analysis. Timing becomes critical. Actions intersect with lawful process. Compliance is expected. Deviation is recorded. Boxes are relocated. Access is controlled. Instructions are followed without context. Witnesses describe logistics. Transportation coincides with recovery efforts. Inference narrows. Innocent handling becomes less plausible. Intent is assessed through sequence. Obstruction statutes attach through conduct. Knowledge is inferred from response. The state examines concealment. Delay acquires legal meaning. Physical control equals responsibility. The act of movement becomes evidentiary. Authority over documents is established. Exposure increases with each step. Corroboration through physical evidence stabilizes testimony. Photographs anchor accounts. Locations are fixed. Storage conditions are visible. Security deficiencies are documented. Testimony aligns with images. Disputes over memory diminish. The record becomes concrete. Jurors see rather than imagine. Risk assessments are supported. National security implications are contextualized. Handling standards are contrasted. Compliance failures are observable. The evidentiary threshold strengthens. Proof exceeds assertion. The case resists dismissal. Physical documentation constrains narrative flexibility. The state relies on material fact. Internal cohesion deteriorates once personal liability emerges. Collective loyalty yields to individual calculation. Legal risk becomes tangible. Counsel advice diverges. Silence no longer protects. Cooperation becomes strategic. Immunity and leniency reshape incentives. Networks fragment. Information flows outward. Trust erodes internally. Coordination weakens. Defensive narratives lose consistency. Prosecutors exploit divergence. Witnesses separate their conduct from leadership. Exposure is redistributed. The organization loses narrative control. Authority cannot compel risk absorption. Legal systems override informal bonds. The structure collapses under pressure. Compliance replaces allegiance. Survival instincts dominate decision-making. Institutional processes activate once evidentiary thresholds are met. Oversight mechanisms engage. Prosecutorial discretion is exercised. Judicial supervision increases. Protective orders are issued. Witness security becomes formalized. Records enter permanent archives. Testimony shapes future enforcement norms. Executive power encounters structural limits. Precedent formation begins. Accountability mechanisms function independently of political outcomes. Legal exposure persists beyond electoral cycles. Institutional memory hardens. Constraints outlast individuals. Governance frameworks reassert authority. Power is regulated through process. Law displaces personality. The system absorbs shock through procedure. What emerges is a record of institutional strain. Legal processes were tested. Safeguards were challenged. Informal power displaced formal procedure. Electoral mechanisms were pressured. Custodial rules were ignored. Oversight was resisted. Internal accountability failed before external enforcement began. The system responded late, but methodically. Evidence accumulated. Authority was traced. Responsibility narrowed. The failures were not abstract. They were operational. They involved documents, directives, timing, and control. Governance weakened where loyalty replaced compliance. Law reasserted itself through process, not spectacle. The analytical risk going forward is structural. If internal cooperation becomes the primary trigger for accountability, future systems may fail earlier and more quietly. Preventive norms matter. Institutional memory matters. Delay increases damage. Enforcement restores balance, but cannot reverse erosion already incurred. Power without constraint invites repetition. Law without timeliness invites escalation. For continued evidence-based analysis focused on law, institutions, and governance, subscribe to Stay Informed, regular reporting, clear structure, no noise.